Hello, this is David from DN Cognitive Counseling. Tonight I want to talk about something that made me upset and is very hurtful to Americans and American society in general. I keep saying that we keep hearing things from the right and the left about reshaping reality to fit a narrative. And the truth is, it happens to both. They both do a very similar thing in the way they describe reality. When you are working with somebody in any therapeutic setting, the first thing you always want to get to is what is the truth? What is reality? What is actually happening? And again, when you hear people portray something, it's who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? Now, I did a video yesterday that made me very upset because of the nature and the vitriol of how effective it is in portraying something that we know to be true in our society. And it's true to differing degrees. I wouldn't say that every individual is a racist, the same way that I wouldn't say that somebody is not a racist. There is people who have individual aspects of racism. And I am not one of those believers who believe that you need to only have power to be racist. I've had many clients I've worked with who are minorities who held very racist beliefs about their own people, about other people, about groups of people. So racism, I understand, is on all sides in all different directions. It doesn't excuse anybody's racism. Saying somebody else is racist, therefore I can be, is the same way that I can murder somebody because somebody else is a murderer. It doesn't work that way. Something is right or something is wrong. Today I'm going to choose to deal with something and helps hopefully everybody be able to look at something and say, is this reality or reshaping reality to fit a narrative that you already believe? This goes back to the whole idea of confirmation bias, trying to create something in order to tell a new story. So with that in mind, I was listening to somebody actually forward this to me about the Michael Knowles show. And he describes the same events that I talked about with Amy Cooper and with Colin Cooper. And like I said, I was talking very well about Mr. Cooper, and I thought that Miss Cooper was doing horrific, horrible, racist. Really, as I said, she should have been arrested. But let's see how Mr. Knowles rationalizes and twists the story in order to get a agenda that he has in his mind, and let's talk about it. And I'm going to stop and go so we can actually look at this together and talk about it. Now, if you think that I get something wrong, I would love for you to tell me. If you say, no, David, that point absolutely makes sense, there's a reality orientation, I would love to hear it. So let's do that together right now.
I'll set the scene for you in Central Park. There's a woman walking her dog. There is a man who is bird watching, but he's really people watching because he starts getting involved in this woman's business. I will refer to her as Ms. Karen. I will refer to him as Mr. Karen. So Ms. Karen is walking her dog, and she's got the dog without a leash. So Mr. Karen decides to get very nosy and tell Ms. Karen to put a leash on her dog. Ms. Karen then says she doesn't want to put the leash on her dog. So Mr. Karen, like a creep, says, okay, well then I'm going to do something that you're not going to like very much, reaches into his bag, pulls out doggy treats that this guy only had so that he could lure other people's dogs away because he was so irritated when the dogs didn't have leashes.
So let's talk a little bit in that little clip about how Michael sets the scene. By the way, there are no facts that he states that I would say is untrue. But the way it's framed is untrue. First off, by calling them Karens, he is already demeaning both of the positions. Mr. Cooper, as I will call Mr. Cooper and Mrs. Cooper, just for the simplest aspects of this. Mr. Cooper, obviously, from his behavior, seen this many times that people took their dogs to this area where they're supposed to be leashed. And he's there often. He knows there's going to be somebody else that's going to come here, take their dog off the leash, and going to tell me, I don't care. So he devised a plan in his head that show these people why it's better for them to keep their dogs on their leash. He's doing it in a non-violent way, not breaking the law, and not being a creep. He's protecting an area that he believes needs protecting. Now, I don't know what's the reason. It could be that, as they say, he's an avid bird watcher, in which case that he believes that the dogs are getting in the way of the birds, in which case is causing problems to them in the environmental factor, or he just doesn't want to see the area that he has being ripped up or pushed up by dogs who are running around in this area. His motivation to me does not make a difference. But you'll notice that when Michael talks about it, he's already a creep. He's already somebody he is putting into a box without understanding. Did he speak to Mr. Cooper and say, Mr. Cooper, I really don't understand. Why did you do this for? What has your experiences been? What has gone on in the past that made you decide to do this? No. He already produces the idea we're dealing with a creep here. And in that language, he's already dismissing him even before he gets to understand him, which is a terrible thing to do, and being judgmental of somebody without understanding. There's an old adage, don't judge me until you know me. So let's talk a little bit more about this.
Mr. Karen pulls out doggy treats to lure Ms. Karen's dog away. And I think the exact words that Mr. Karen said, according to him, were, I'm going to do what I'm going to do and you're not going to like it. That's a pretty weird thing to say when you're isolated with somebody in a park.
Okay, again, what's the idea that Michael puts out? Look at these weird words that he says. What Michael fails to tell you is the words prior to that, which is the woman saying, I'm going to do what I want to do. Right? So if his intention is to get the dog on the leash, again, for whatever reason, and he's upset about the fact that the dog's not on the leash, and the woman sadly says, well, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, him turning around and saying, well, I'm going to do what I'm going to do and you're not going to like it. Now, I knew about those words last night without realizing the context of them. But actually, from Michael's context that he gives, it makes a lot more sense as to why this man said what he said and what his intent was. Now, again, could I be wrong? It's possible. But it does fit the narrative for what has actually gone on, for what he does, and what follows in the video. What Michael is talking about doesn't follow at all. Of a creepy guy who's bothering some woman in the park for no reason. That this man was looking for a fight. Not looking for somebody doing something wrong. I also like how the fact that Michael keeps believing that somehow we're not responsible for the people that litter. We're not responsible when somebody's breaking a rule or doing something wrong. Now, I grew up in New York, and I do know the city very, very well. And I do know that when we treat it a certain way, it looks a certain way. And when people are allowed to treat it any way they want, it turns into something that looks really bad. And if you have love for the city and you're a caring individual, there's nothing wrong with sticking up and saying, these are our laws, they're here for a reason, respect them. It's very interesting that when in Singapore, that many of the pundits at the time, and I can't speak about Michael because I don't know if he was around at that point, but we had an American kid that went to Singapore and spray painted their area. And they went ahead and they caned this kid. And it was the right at that point saying, good, people should follow the rules and the law of the places they're in. And I happen to believe a similar concept. People should follow the rules. And if somebody's breaking a rule and somebody say, wait a minute, you're doing something wrong, we as citizens have every right to speak out when a rule is being broken. And not because we're being this quote-unquote Karen that he keeps trying to disparage him with. The idea very simply is, I want my area, the park, to remain beautiful. I want the rules to be followed so things don't get destroyed or plants don't get trampled on or bushes don't get, whatever is going to happen to them. I care about the environment, or I care about this. And Mr. Cooper had every right to that as a citizen of the state. And the way, again, he's being framed already by Mr. Knowles is to put him in a light that is disparaging.
Especially if you're a man and she's a woman. Then Ms. Karen loses her mind. I have caught you up. We have set the scene. Now take a listen to what ensues.
Would you please stop? Sir, I'm asking you to stop.
Please don't come.
Okay. The reality is, I've already seen this on the last video. We don't need to go through this again. So the fact is that we get to the point where she goes ahead, she makes the phone call, she does all the things, and every single fact that we see on this video, absolutely agree, is exactly what happened. In fact, I don't disagree with Mr. Knowles on any of the facts that he stated. Everything he said was absolutely true, statement of facts. But the presentation and the way he frames them is with prejudice and not factual.
Man into the ramble! Please send the cops immediately! I'm in Central Park in the ramble. I don't know.
Thank you.
Okay, so obviously this woman behaving absolutely hysterically. But the guy was behaving hysterically too. They are both Karen. This is Mr. and Ms. Karen. I think they should get married. They should live unhappily ever after.
Actually, they're Mr. and Miss Cooper, not Karen. That's first of all. And second of all, there is nothing in the man's behavior at all that shows anything that's hysterical. Not in his tone of voice, not in the way that he's speaking, not in after she finally puts the click on the leash where he says, thank you. Not one part of that video at all does he act hysterical. But Michael decides, I'm going to broad brush them because obviously her behavior is hysterical, but his was just as well, making an equation here that doesn't equate.
Everyone is focusing on how wrong this woman was, and they're calling her all sorts of things. She's a racist, she's terrible, she's got to have her life ruined. And no one's focusing on what a weirdo, creepy dude this guy is.
Okay. The reality is, again, the reason why everybody is focusing on those things, Mr. Knowles, is because all of those things are self-evident to be true. The aspect of the creepy dude that you're creating is one that is in your mind. You have created this scenario in order to justify or rationalize something in your own head that does not exist in reality. There's nothing that he did was creepy. He wanted something to not be done in the park. Obviously, it's been done before, many a time. He's decided he's coming up with a plan to try to stop a behavior that is illegal and fined by the city of New York. But yet, he's a creep because he wanted to go ahead and be a law follower and have other people be a law follower. That makes no sense in any rational term. He's not creepy. We have his motivation. We know why he's doing it. And he cares about what's going on. And I want you to think about that.
This guy, Mr. Karen, is much more in the wrong than this lady, Ms. Karen. Much more in the wrong. Men should not behave like that.
I like that, Mr. Knowles. So because you've defined that men should not behave like that, whatever the that is, therefore he's in wrong based upon your definition. And I want you to think about that. He's wrong because he's not acting like the man you determine he should be.
Men should not go up to women in the middle of parks and start chatting with them if they don't want to be chatted with, and, stick around there if they don't want to be stuck around with.
Men should not be allowed to walk over a woman and start a chat. Wow! I want you to understand the lengths that Mr. Knowles goes to disparage somebody, that a man should have no right to ever walk over to a woman and have a chat with her in a park. It's mind-boggling. Really? Never should be allowed. What you're really saying is you should let be and mind people's business. And that's a very nice idea if you want to mind your own business and do what you want to do. And you have every right to that. I mean, if somebody wants to mind their business and go on with their day, and that's fine. But there is also nothing wrong with telling people who you disagree with about what they're doing, especially when it breaks the law, why you don't like it. If somebody was taking litter and coming in front of Mr. Knowles' house and dumping their litter in front of Mr. Knowles' house on the public area, would it be in Mr. Knowles' right to say, excuse me, please stop throwing garbage there? Or should Mr. Knowles say, no, it's their right, I shouldn't say a word. If it's a woman, I should say nothing. Think about that rationally. Like I said, there's an agenda here that's part of the problem.
And then start feeding treats to their dogs that you're trying to lure away, treats that you only have to lure people's dogs away, and then start filming them. That's weird behavior. People shouldn't do that. Also, men should not humiliate women. They should not humiliate women privately. They should not humiliate women publicly by filming them and putting that video all over the internet. And
that's a very nice idea that you think that people shouldn't be able to humiliate people. That's very nice. And I'm glad, morally speaking, you have this idea. There's also some other person that might have an idea that whether you're a man or a woman, doing something wrong should be put out there to humiliate and to ridicule, or to be able to say that's wrong, because it educates the populace and the population about what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior. Sitting there and saying, we should just let it go and we shouldn't care, that's really not a road that everybody wants to choose.
And then subsequently, or consequently rather, ruining her life. That's not very chivalrous behavior. That is the behavior of a society that has lost the sense of manliness and gentlemanliness. And then, let's not forget, most of all, he started it. This guy started it.
I can't believe that a grown man said he started it. Are we back in 4th grade? He started it? Seriously? That's the message? That's the horrific behavior? Not somebody who's being a good citizen, standing up for their civic duty to say something that they see as wrong, and coming up with an idea to show the person that I'm going to throw those dog treats and make your dog go nuts, and you're not going to have a problem controlling it, and then you'll understand why you want to keep it on a leash. No, teaching the person that lesson, that we should never ever do, especially if it's a woman. Really.
Because he had to start caroning around her business and making a big fuss because she didn't have her dog on a leash in the park. Okay? Now, what people are trying to do, what race hustling, mostly white liberal social justice warriors are trying to do, is make this a whole racial issue. I guarantee you, if the case was flipped, and this woman was walking around and this guy didn't have his dog on a leash, they would be making a big deal about that. They would be saying, oh, it's not a big deal to have your dog on a leash.
You're now assuming something that is not reality. You're now creating something that has no basis, and you're putting there. Like, oh, if it was a white person that was sitting there with the black person was sitting their dog on the leash, nobody would say anything. That's an untrue statement. The point is that there will be people, and I believe that Mr. Cooper himself would have said if he saw somebody who was African American sitting there with his dog and it was running around that way, I'm assuming he would do the exact same thing. He would have gone ahead and had the same plan. His intention wasn't looking for a nice white young woman and to throw dog treats at to make her upset. His upsetness comes from stopping people with the animals doing something to the area. He didn't decide who it was going to be. It was the person who did it, and that's who he stopped.
This is obviously a very opportunistic case for people to push a leftist narrative. It's the same narrative that we see constantly, all over the political left. The New York Times is pushing this precise narrative. Listen to this. They describe him, Mr. Cooper, 57, a Harvard graduate who works in communications. Is hearing that he's a Harvard graduate supposed to make me think he's a more respectable fellow? That is...
It's interesting. When the New York Times tells you that he's a Harvard graduate, that's not important information. But the fact that he's a creep, which was not said but is presumed because you decide his behavior is creepy, that's okay. I think what whether he was Harvard graduate or not is irrelevant. I happen to agree with Mr. Knowles on the fact that whether he was from Harvard, whether he was a graduate, whether he was homeless would make absolutely no difference. Whether Mr. Cooper was black or white would not make a difference in terms of his behavior. The problem comes, and I think Mr. Knowles was blind to what was actually said and done. And I'll show you quickly where he gets this totally wrong on the facts.
Is not the way to convince somebody that this guy is respectable. I don't think so. He's long been a prominent birder in the city and is on the board of the New York City Audubon Society. A prominent birder? What is a prominent birder? Oh yes, Mr. Cooper, that well-known birder. Oh yes, I see him birding about. Oh, what is birding? I guess he looks at birds. That's what that means.
Yes, Mr. Knowles, and again, it's disparaging. I happen not to share the desire to watch birds, nor am I a birder. But the concept that somebody likes to and that they take that seriously is not something you need to disparage either. Yes, he's a person that enjoys birds. And the reason why that's important, Mr. Knowles, to understand is why he cared about the situation to begin with. You're not understanding his motivation nor caring because it doesn't fit your narrative. Your narrative is that some creepy guy bothered another creepy girl and therefore now people are throwing out of proportion because one was white and one was black. But that's not what's going on here. And you're missing it because you're not looking at it or breaking it down. You have your own bias that's coming straight through.
He's a bird watcher. There are no prominent bird watchers. Okay, he's a guy. Here's what they're saying. Mr. Cooper, who 35 years ago went to a college in Boston, looks at birds and enjoys looking at birds. Okay, fine. Maybe he's an otherwise nice guy. He doesn't seem like a nice guy from this video, but sure. Then the New York Times admits what he did. This is directly from the New York Times, quoting Mr. Cooper. Look, if you're going to do what you want, I'm going to do what I want, but you're not going to like it, he told her, before he pulled out the treats and began filming, according to his post. Mr. Cooper then produced dog treats and said, I pull out the dog treats I carry for just such intransigence, he wrote. He's admitting he carries the treats to get weird with other people's dogs.
No. You see, Mr. Knowles, you just said what he said, and then you switched it. He didn't say, I want to get weird with people. He said, when people break the law and I see this behavior, this is what I do. That's what he said. What you're saying, he did not say. You are twisting words and saying words that were never said. He's not saying I get weird with people. He's saying I don't like intransients. What does that word mean? Lawbreakers. There are signs everywhere. Fines for not having your dog on a leash. He's saying, I'm tired of people breaking that law. I always thought that people on the right loved the fact that the laws should be followed. There were no laws that were to be like, we'll just ignore those. And this is a person who cared about this area. He obviously, the avid bird watcher, is talking about the environmental issues, and it's important to him. And given the fact that it was within the grounds of following the law and nothing that he did was breaking the law, to say this about him is disparaging.
That's when I started video recording with my iPhone and when her inner Karen fully emerged and took a dark turn, he said, using the name that has become slang for an entitled white woman. So first of all, the people who are trying to make this a racial thing should at least admit off the top, this guy is using a racist term. The New York Times is calling it a racist term. Now, it would appear that the word Karen has transcended race and sex, mostly because of this guy. But from the very beginning, if they're saying that this woman is a racist, surely this guy is a racist too. He's using the term that the Times admits is racist.
In terms of whether or not he used a racial term after the event to describe the event, does not in any way, shape, or form change anything about the event. Mr. Cooper could be an avid KKK member. He could be the biggest racist in the world. And it would not change one iota what happened in the events of this video and what happened in what she said. Now, Whether or not Mr. Cooper believes that Karen is a racist term or a statement about young girls who are acting in that way, I don't know. And maybe Mr. Cooper is a racist. I have no clue. And I don't think it's relevant. Whether Mr. Cooper is a racist or not doesn't negate what happened here that is so important to understand that, Mr. Knowles, you seem to miss totally. But let's go on.
What's the end result? She loses her job and she loses her dog. I'm not joking. She got fired from her investment management firm and they took her dog away.
Wow. I can't imagine why they would take her dog away after she was treating him so well in that video. You mean when you literally are taking your dog and wringing its neck because you're refusing to put the leash on and your dog is out of control because the dog treats all around and the dog wants to get to the dog treats, but instead of you taking the leash and putting it on because God forbid you should ever have to change your behavior and you stand on your principle to say, I'm not going to make you let me do this. And what do? You cause the whole issue that you don't care about your dog and you're literally there abusing it. You're literally wringing the dog's neck. Watch the video. That poor dog didn't do anything to anybody. And losing her job? The reason why she lost her job comes next in the next part of the video. But the fact is, she should have gotten much worse than lost her job. Because you still missed there was a crime that took place on that video. And Mr. Knowles, you've not addressed the criminal activity yet, or gotten to it. As of now, the only crime she committed is something to get a fine for. She went ahead, had a dog on the lawn, not leashed, running around. That is a crime that you get a fine for. Not jail time, but a fine. That was the criminal event that took place so far. He, Mr. Cooper, did no crime of any sort. The fact that you call him a creep in order to demean him does not make it any worse than anything else. All he pointed out was follow the law. And it's that simple.
For what? Because she had this hysterical meltdown in the park? Because some hysterical guy goaded her into it?
No, because she was breaking the law in the park, not because she was hysterical. And nowhere in that video or any report is this guy being hysterical at all. But again, Mr. Knowles, throw that in there just to mislead people into believing a narrative that doesn't exist.
And now she's being smeared as a racist. Is this woman a racist? I don't know. Maybe she is, but from the video I can't conclude that she's a racist. Why?
No, we can't conclude that Miss Cooper is a racist. That is 100% true. But what we can conclude is she used racism and she used tropes in order to try to control a situation. She did something much, much worse than being a racist. Whether somebody's a racist is in their heart. You can't know all the time when people are racist. But what you can know is racist behavior. What you can know is when somebody outs themselves in a racist idea, as we're going to see, because you, again, decide to take the facts and twist them, as you did twice already.
They're saying that the two pieces of evidence that this woman is a racist are that she behaved hysterically on the phone with the cops and that she noted several times that he is an African-American man. Well, she was behaving hysterically before she ever called the cops. From the very beginning of the video, she says, hi, I'm gonna get away from me, please, stop it. And she's behaving in a ridiculous way, but it's not as though her behavior changed in any significant way when she called the cops. She was already behaving hysterically, so that would...
Mr. Knowles, this is why you should never become a psychologist, because you're actually misstating again reality. It is true that she was being hysterical at the beginning of the video when she is saying to him, stop recording me, stop recording me, stop recording me, and she gets more hysterical as she goes along, and he calmly says, keep away from me, keep away from me, very calmly. He is not hysterical in any way, shape, or form. So that framework and what happens there, again, that's just the facts. But the next part is when she calls the police, listen to her voice. She calms down. She states much more calm about the facts. When the police do not become responsive in the way that she wants, then her hysterics get raised. Again. And that's what you actually hear. That's the order of events, not the manner by which you decide to create them on.
Was not performative. And the implication here is that she was performing this hysteria for the cops because she wanted to get the cops there to kill the man. Because, you know, there's an epidemic in America of racist cops killing innocent black men, which is not true.
Now, whether or not there are an epidemic of cops killing black men, I would agree 100%. If you take a look at the numbers, that is absolutely untrue, and you're absolutely correct about it. But Mr. Knowles, and this is where the naivety is a little bit disingenuous, because I know you're an intelligent man, and I know that you're well-read. The perception of the population is that if I'm going to call the police, and it's an interracial situation like that, that there's going to be one advantage over another. I'm not saying that when the police come that advantage is actually going to be real. But the people that believe that advantage are believing that advantage is due to race. So you're absolutely correct. It may be nothing that the police are going to come and they're going to act appropriately, which, by the way, they didn't, but we'll get to that in a minute. But the fact is, the mindset in which she had was, I am going to use race as a means of punishing you for coming here and trying to get me to go ahead and leash my dog. This dog was running around and driving her nuts during this entire time. And not once did she just go click to put it down to at least make it a little easier. But she wouldn't, because of her ego. Now again, do I know that for a fact? No. But it does seem that way and fit the narrative of the story.
There are incidents that are sensationalized that try to craft this narrative that there is an epidemic of racist cops slaughtering innocent black men. But that is...
Again, Mr. Knowles, I'm going to agree with you. I think there is, on the left, the idea that people will frame stories in that when people make a mistake when they are white and kill somebody who's black, that it must be racism. That must be the case. The only answer is racism. And of course, that is probably not going to be true. The problem is when it's true and when it's not is not so easy to determine. It's not an easy answer of, well, how do you know that that was a racist act or not? You don't sometimes, and that's where these problems come about. But to deny that that is even the perception, and nobody has that perception out there, is just untrue. There have been many white people who are killed by police that nobody talks about because it doesn't fit a narrative. But that's just as horrible, because we need every police officer to be held accountable for horrible acts, be it from a racist standpoint, be it from an incompetent standpoint, be it from the standpoint that they just have anger management problems or mental health issues. And don't think that there aren't police officers or firefighters that do. I've met many. So the fact remains that, again, you're correct in the left creating a narrative story, and then you're doing the same thing. Deal in the facts. Deal with what you know. Be able to talk about the things in a cohesive manner. Absolutely agree with you. But that's not what's going on. You're reframing it.
Isn't the case. The reason that the stories become so sensational when they happen is precisely because they are so rare. It is very easy to be emotionally manipulated, particularly by the mainstream media on issues like this, but the statistics do not bear it out. So there's that first part, gone. What about the second one? She kept noting that he's an African-American man. Again, maybe she's a racist, maybe she's not a racist, maybe the definition of racism keeps changing because the left exploits it so much. I mean, now we're told that only certain races can be racist, but other races can't be racist. I'm not joking. That's what the left tells you. So again, I don't even know what definition we're working with anymore, but let's just look at that piece of evidence. She keeps saying on the phone, he's an African-American man.
Okay, I love this because Mr. Knowles does a beautiful trick here. He talks to you about the phone call. Did Mr. Cooper know he was an African-American man? Because in the video, she goes to Mr. Cooper and go, I'm going to tell the police that you're an African-American man and you're harassing me. Now, Mr. Knowles, I would have to ask you one simple question. Why did she have to say to Mr. Cooper, I'm going to tell him you're African-American? Had Miss Cooper said, oh, I'm going to call the police and say that you're harassing me, or I'm going to tell them you're harassing me, okay. That's not what she said. She said, I'm going to tell them you're threatening me, and you're going to call the police and tell them you're an African-American man. By the way, neither of what she did. And those are the facts. She's saying, I'm going to tell them. What was her motivation? Why was she telling him I'm going to tell them? If somebody comes to attack you, do you go, by the way, to the attacker? Excuse me, when you're attacking me, if you continue this attack, I'm going to call the police and tell them you're this and this and this. Nobody does that. Her motivation was trying to control him to stop videotaping and leave her alone. I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And that was the attitude that Mr. Cooper did not like. And he says, go right ahead, call. But it wasn't the identification on the phone that he was African American that tells you that. And that's why it's disingenuous to focus in on that part of the video without talking about the first part of the video where she says to him, well, I'm going to say you're an African American man. As if Mr. Cooper didn't know. The only reason to tell Mr. Cooper that she's going to say that is because we all know those cops are going to come, and because you're an African-American man, they're going to see you as the aggressor. That was what's called subtext of the language she was using to tell him that. She was saying to him, that is the reason why.
Also notes that he's wearing a bike helmet. Right? When you call, if you are going to call and make a police report, which was a ridiculous thing for this woman to do in this case, but both of these people were behaving in a ridiculous manner. So she calls and makes a police report. When you make a police report, you describe the person that you're making the police report on. Right? You don't say, well, he's wearing a blue shirt. Okay, can you tell us anything else about him? No, I'm not allowed to say anything else about him because if I do, I'll be smeared as a racist and lose my job.
Again, Mr. Knowles, it wasn't the fact that on the phone she said he was an African American wearing a bike helmet. That wasn't the issue. It was prior to the phone call telling Mr. Cooper that I'm going to tell him that you're an African American man. That was the issue. And you're totally missing it because it doesn't fit your narrative. Despite the fact that the fact is right in front of you and you play it in the own video. But you're misaligning the event to negate that entire effect. To say, well, we're not going to talk about that. We're just going to talk about the phone call. Because if it was only on the phone call, you'd be right. But it wasn't only on the phone call. It was prior to the phone call where she tells him that. See, that's what establishes that. And then you say they both acted ridiculous. Again, there's nothing that he did that acted ridiculous other than stand up for a law that exists. Now, you might not like the law. You may think that's a small law. Nobody should care about that law. And you're entitled to that opinion. And guess what? If it was you who were walking by and you didn't care, no problem. But Mr. Cooper did care. And he was within his rights to care as a citizen of New York to state the fact that the rules should be followed. And he had every right to say so.
So she mentions his race. She also mentions that he's wearing a bicycle helmet. Is she a cyclophobe? Does she have a deep-seated hatred of bicycles or something like that? I don't know. Why did she include that detail? That would seem to be evidence to me that she's including descriptors so that hopefully the police can come and arrest this man for the high crime of being a weirdo with dog treats.
What she was trying to do was to get the police come and arrest him for basically assault. Okay? That's what she was trying to do. She was saying that he's threatening me. And in the state of New York, and actually most states in the country, that verbally threatening somebody is called assault. Okay? When you hit them, that's the battery. But assault is a crime. And she was going to lie to get Mr. Cooper to be brought in jail in handcuffs, to be taken out of the park, because she was going to say that he assaulted her. That's what she did. Now, that is a major issue. She wanted him arrested for the crime of assaulting her. And that's what you're missing again. And Mr. Cooper was basically standing up for the law. And again, Mr. Knowles, where you reframe this into this small little narrative without recognizing what's actually going on, the racial undertone, to say, I'm going to scare you because you're black, you should be afraid of the police, which to me is an absolutely horrible message. And the sad part is that so many people have to because of these narratives. Not because we get to the truth and not because we accountability. When the right gets up and says, yes, that's racism, then things are moving in a better direction. When the left can get up and say, no, that's not racism, this is not proof of that, then we're heading in a better direction. When we get people to start dealing in reality, instead of making everything about their narrative that fits their bubble, we will be in a much better place. But you are guilty of exactly what you claim the left media does. You are reconstructing the narrative to fit your storyline without the facts.
Conservatives need to stop playing into this nonsense. They have to. Both of these people behaved badly. Both of them behaved in a shameful way, an embarrassing way.
No, both did not behave in an embarrassing and shameful way. One of them was breaking the law once by not allowing her dog to be on the leash, and then she broke the law a second time, which, by the way, is a year in jail for making the false report, up to a year in jail. So the fact was she should have been arrested and brought down and charges brought against her for making a false report. She admits on the video what lie she's going to tell the police if he doesn't stop taping her, which is not a crime. He committed no crime. He did nothing wrong. He stood up for a law, and you're equating them that they're the same thing. That is fitting something into your narrative and bubble that has nothing to do with reality.
Now, only Mr. Karen filmed Ms. Karen and ruined her life, but they both behaved in a silly way. The woman, apparently, according to reports, is a liberal, so I don't exactly have a political dog in this fight.
This, again, just is so striking. I don't care what her political affiliation is. Being a liberal and using racial overtones that way is wrong. Being a conservative and using racial overtones is wrong. Being an independent and using racial overtones is wrong. What does it make a difference what her political leanings are? Her hypocrisy of the fact that she's a liberal and how could she use this tone is irrelevant. There are racists on every side. You have non-racists on every side. And that's what I'm trying to get across more often than not, is the idea of what's true. The reality of seeing a situation, be able to break it down, and knowing that if Miss Cooper was your sister and Mr. Cooper was your brother, what would you say then? And knowing the situation. And knowing how they felt. Would you say that your sister was at wrong? Or would you say your brother was at wrong? Or would you say that they both were equal? I can honestly say, what I would say if it was my sister, she should have been arrested. She should have been arrested. That would have been justice. That's not what happened. And by the way, they would plead down and she would have gotten a small fine for it or everything else that they do if she was a first timer. But the point was, she understood she broke the law and that if she would ever do something like that again, the penalties would increase. As does for first-time offenders for most things that people don't realize how the system works. There's a charge, and then there's what they can do afterwards based upon the level of the sophistication, and as well as your history and all that stuff that goes involved. But the least is she should have been arrested for making a false report. Evidence right there to the statement that she's making a false report. And what is horrible about this is when she said to Mr. Cooper, I'm going to tell him you're African American. As a threat that somehow you should. And I loved his response that you somehow think this hysterical man said, oh, okay, sure. You go do that. No problem. You call the police. Because hysterical people just sound so rational. And when at the end, when he says thank you, when she finally leashes the dog, which is what he wanted originally, that's not an hysterical person either. So, Mr. Knowles, your an idea that Miss Cooper and Mr. Cooper are on equal level playing grounds and they're equally at fault is erroneous. And again, political affiliation means absolutely nothing in evaluating that.
Right. But I'm just so offended by this guy's behavior. It's so unchivalrous. It's so unmanly. It's just ugly behavior.
Well, Mr. Knowles, tell us how you really feel. It doesn't matter what you think is chivalrous or not chivalrous. It might not be the situation that you agree with about what he did, and you have every right to have your opinion that you don't agree with what he did. That's excellent. That's your right. It's also his right to do what he did, as he broke no law. He did nothing wrong. She did two things wrong. The first one was letting her dog without the leash, which there are signs everywhere dogs must be leashed. And the second she did wrong was she made a false police report, which again is a much greater crime and should have been arrested for. Those are the two legal things she did wrong. Then she did something that was morally wrong. And this is the part you missed. And it wasn't identifying Mr. Cooper on the phone to the police as an African American. It was before the phone call telling Mr. Cooper that he's an African American. And I'm going to call the police, as he should be afraid of the police because he's an African American. That message is morally wrong. And on the phone, she escalated her voice from the beginning of the phone call to later to get them to be responsive to her as if it was an emergency that they should come. Despite the fact there was no emergency, she approached him twice on that video, going back and forth, coming closer to him, and he's saying, "Go away, back away." That's not a person that's afraid of somebody. She's the aggressor. That's called being aggressive in her body language. He wasn't.
Okay, and I think some conservatives want to prove that they're not racists to the left, which, by the way, is not possible because the left doesn't care whether you're a racist or not. They just want to smear you.
Your job is not to prove to anybody whether you're a racist or not. Nobody's a job to prove they're not a racist. But it is important that we have conversations about the way that we see things and how race plays a role. To totally deny that no people out there ever make mistakes or do anything wrong because of racial groups or seeing people a certain way and make certain decisions is incredibly naive. We know in psychology that's just untrue. That's proven fact that people will see something and have a different reaction. African American police officers have a different reaction to African Americans when they're on the job. Why is that? It's important to recognize that, not to deny it, not to sit and say, "Oh, we'll just pretend it doesn't exist." But I do agree that we don't need to be labeling people. And I think that it gets overshadowed. So I think, Mr. Knowles, what you're doing, and again, I could be wrong, but you might be overgeneralizing a defense in a situation that is clear as day. And you can't see the light here that's as clear as day because of the bubble you put yourself in.
You know who's going to know if you're a racist or not? You. That's it. Do you hate people of other races? And do you judge them unfairly based on their race? No? Okay, good. You're not a racist. Good. Don't worry. Doesn't matter what the left says about you.
I wish it was that simple. I wish the idea of you being racist or not was only the idea about that statement. There's a lot of other feelings and statements that can determine whether somebody has racial overtones or undertones and factors. One of my favorite characters of all time is Archie Bunker, who, by the way, was not a horrible person, but had many racist thinking. He was a nice racist, but a racist nonetheless. And the reason why that character was so important, and for television history, it portrayed somebody who was not a mean person, not a bad person, who grew up with a certain way of thinking that had its basis in being wrong to judge groups a certain way. And that was a racist ideology. And it has effects in the choices that people make and what they will tolerate or not tolerate because of it. It's much deeper than that. And that's what systematic racism is about. It's understanding how it works within a system emotionally, not just a matter of the overt racism that you're talking about.
If you know it, it's good enough. Okay? Defending this creep does not make you Rosa Parks. All right?
This man, and again, I take umbrage to the statement that this man is a creep. He is not a creep in any way, shape, or form. There's nothing on the video that makes him a creep. Other than your own judgment about him, which I don't even know where you get it from, just because you think he shouldn't have gotten involved. But that does not make him a creep.
Ruining this woman's life does not make you Martin Luther King. Does anyone really believe that this woman should have her life ruined over this thing? Because she was walking her dog and some creep tried to lure the dog away and then filmed her and humiliated her nationally? No, nobody thinks that. I don't think the guy, this weirdo birdwatcher, should have his life ruined either. I don't
think, first of all, again, calling him a weirdo birdwatcher, I think is, again, disparaging for no reason. I have not used a disparaging word against her in terms of her ability or person, but her behavior, which it was evident. That was the problem. Not calling her names or putting her down. Did she deserve losing her job? That would be her job's determination in terms of whether or not it wants to affiliate with a person who could do that. That's the job's decision. And that's why the job did what it wanted to do. The people at the job said, we don't want to be associated with somebody who could do this type of behavior. So yes, I think the fact that's the case. Will in 4 months from now or 3 months from now, anybody remember who she is? Probably not. And people will forget this conversation, and people will forget where this happened, as people have forgotten so many other situations in the past. But these things are important that we remember, that we understand, to bring these things in the forefront, so that these things just don't go into the woodwork and we pretend they don't exist. Because when we pretend they don't exist, we make a lot of other people angry who have to face them, and then say to them, your experiences don't really matter, yours don't count, you don't really feel that way, I don't see what you're seeing. And when you do that, and you devalue them that way, that is horrific. And it brings anger. Justifiable anger. To tell people, nah, you're not really feeling that. That doesn't really happen. For somebody that works with Ben Shapiro, who has experienced so much anti-Semitism, tons of it, to sit and try to devalue somebody who's experiencing a racist act by saying, I'm going to get these police officers, and you know how racist they are, and whether the threat was they're going to arrest you because of it, and believe me, or because the police are going to come and something worse is going to happen, which I can't tell which one is she meant, and I don't know. But either one is problematic. And those are the facts. There is no other way to see that. There is no other reality or story sense that you're making up. You're placing things in the wrong spots in order to make a case that doesn't exist. And that goes to your own bias. It would have been much stronger for you, Mr. Knowles, to come out and say, this is a racist act. This is where racism lives. This is how it looks like. But it doesn't happen everywhere. Not everybody does this. That would be much stronger. That actually is reality. That the police did not come and arrest Mr. Cooper and throw him in jail and say to Mr. Cooper, you're going ahead and we're going to put you away in a long time because a white woman complained. No, the police didn't do that. So at least they didn't do that. But what you should have said was the police should have arrested her for making a false report. That should have came out of your mouth. Because she broke the law. Twice. Now that would have been much, much better and much stronger. But it doesn't mean that you need to then say that everything the left says is correct, and therefore now I have to throw in and believe that the flag of everybody's, the way that they see the world as this racist, horrible place has to be true. Both things can be true. You could have a situation where racist events take place, and yet believe in a system that is less racist in its totality that you believe is to be true. But in order to do that, you have to actually look at the facts. And when you do this, you devalue yourself in your ability to be able to get that message across to people. Because you look like you're falling into a narrative.
I don't think either of these people should have their lives ruined. I think they should both take a good long think, sit down, have a good long stew session on how their lives came to this point and maybe what's wrong with the way they see the world. But I don't think either of them should have their lives ruined for this.
I happen to agree. I don't think any of them or anybody should have their life ruined because of this. I do believe this was absolutely horrific. It was a horrible act. It was something that should have been prosecuted. She should have been put in jail for the night, brought into a courtroom, brought in and arraigned, going through the process, because that's what should have happened. I was deeply disturbed by hearing Mr. Knowles' account of the events and the way that it was misrepresented while the facts are right in front of you. And this is the reason why I always say you have to be careful where you get your information from. It doesn't matter whether you believe, oh great, I'm an MSNBC watcher, or I'm a Fox watcher, or I'm a CNN watcher, because this is the place to get my truth from. When it comes to bias, almost nobody is immune. Which is the reason why when somebody says to me, David, you're out of line here where your bias is, I'm always ready to listen. Corey went ahead and gave us a message earlier on about a message I did about bias in Cuomo and said, maybe you're biased on this. And I went ahead, I looked, maybe I was, and I went into this, where's the argument? And then when I went through it, it fell apart. But it is true. I could be biased on something. But I would have to look at it and take a look at that bias and see if it's true. I'm open to that fact. Is everybody else? Does everybody else admit when they're biased and how their biases work? I thought this was absolutely horrific. And then we have what happened in Minnesota, which is another horrific story, where the issue is, again, is it a question of racism or not? And again, you don't know if it's a racist situation or not, but for sure, and I don't care if it was white, black, Hispanic, gay, straight, it doesn't make a difference who the person was. Whoever that was done to, those people should be put in jail for what they did. There's no excuse for it. What I'm happy about is the mayor coming out and saying, yes, should never have happened in a million years. And it's true. Not to anybody. But again, whether it was horrible policing based upon the individuals or was it racist, we can't know that unless we actually have conversations and understand who these people were. And so many times we don't care to get to know them. Don't judge me until you know me. I think it's important that we take that into account. But we can judge the sin, but not the sinner. We can say that was wrong. That's a sin. And again, when we create this illusion that everything's fine, or we try to negate other people's experiences about how they feel and how they feel they're being treated, we have a lot of problems. I have had clients who've been arrested for trespassing on their own building property. And the judges dismiss it outright. But the reality was they had to spend time in jail and were arrested. Now, were the police officers racist? I don't know. But I will tell you, there should have been complaints, and the police officers should be accountable for that type of behavior. On the same token, if a lot of people get away with a lot of things, they shouldn't have. I just think we all need to take a look at that bias, to really explore it, to understand it, so that we stop doing this game. I hope that you like this video. I hope that you'll hit like, and I hope that you will subscribe to the channel, and I hope that you become a patron to the endeavor by hitting the Subscribe-star button below. And I wish you a good night and good mental health.